All right, everybody back from the break. I'll try and keep the energy up after following Coach K and Will. I don't quite have that energy naturally, so we'll see what we can do. But I'm the sports psychologist. Stress balls, take one with the little logo on it. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about sports psychology, what a sports psychologist is. You might be asking, what the hell's a sports psychologist? To which I might say, well, it's one who practices sports psychology. But really, what I'm going to do is kind of break it down. That term gets thrown around quite a bit, and I get a million different ideas from people as I talk about it. What it looks like, what you do with it, it's kind of a general term that means a lot of different things to different people. But first, I just want to say thanks to Jared for inviting me to be a part of this group. It's been great. He talked about our 10:30 a.m. meetings on Wednesday mornings for the last couple of months, and it's been really meaningful to me to be a part of this group of people, really good people, and we get to exchange different ideas from our various disciplines. I've known Jared since high school. He played football at Edmond Memorial. I played at Heritage Hall. They had a weight training program. We didn't. So that's the only difference, really, that I can come up with. So I was kind of an undersized, slow scrapper, a good 2A high school football player, but didn't have the physicals to be able to kind of go to the next level at D1, which was my passion, so I would have liked to be able to be that guy. But anyway, came to grips with that as I had an injury my senior year, which even kept me from being able to go play D2 ball, which was the goal at the time. And so as a high school athlete, that was kind of a tough pill to swallow, to sit on the sideline the last half of my senior year and watch all of my teammates be able to finish out what was the end of all of their football careers. And so we grow up playing our sport and being really passionate about it. Football was my sport since the time I was 7. I kind of excelled, and you get all of this attention from people, you get patted on the head, you get praised, and you start to develop what we call an athletic identity around what you do. And so that was probably one of the things that influenced me down my path. Some other things earlier in life influenced me, some challenges. Will talked a lot about, your kids are going to fail or you're going to go through some hard times. Our family had some hard things happen to us when I was growing up, and I found it useful to be able to sit down and talk it through with somebody, a coach, sometimes an adult, a mentor, not really officially a psychologist, but somebody who kind of operated that way for me. And as I started thinking about it in high school, I thought, psychology is kind of fascinating. Most people think a psychology course is kind of interesting. But I thought, wow, maybe I'll even look at this in college, and who knows where it'll go from there. But I'd reflected back on how meaningful it was to me to have had that interaction at those difficult times in my life. And then the natural tie-in, you as coaches work so closely with these kids, and they're out there in the mornings, they're going through workouts, they're giving you so much of themselves to try and progress in their sport. And so I've always thought there was a natural fit between what coaches are doing and then psychologists maybe a little more specialized in working with people. So I went off to get my degree in psychology and became a clinical psychologist. And I've been back here in Oklahoma. I moved back here from California in 2000 and started my private practice in clinical psychology. So I work quite a bit with adolescents. I tended to get a lot of referrals from the high schools because those were the people I knew when I moved back to town. And so I've really enjoyed working with adolescents, and then it's expanded into couples and families. But a couple of years ago, my wife, our kids had gotten old enough, she said, why don't you go back and get this sports psychology certification? I can handle the kids now. And so I looked into that and saw that I needed to take a few more grad courses and get some training specifically in sports psychology to get this certification. so I can be legit when I walk around saying I do sports psychology. But again, back to the question of like, well, what is it? What is it to be a sports psychologist? When you guys think of sports psychology, what comes to mind? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Do you see the soccer ball? Yeah, I don't know if you can see my my fancy little cartoon. My assistant helped me. I'm technologically challenged, but so it's got a picture of the therapist taking his notes and the soccer ball's on the couch with the quotations, "I'm sick and tired of being kicked around all the time." So what is that sports psychology? Are we like doing therapy, like on the couch? Well, sometimes it really is that. I have folks come into my office and they may be struggling on the golf course, or they're underperforming, or they're having difficulty recovering from an injury when everything says they should be good to go. What I've come to find in this pursuit of this sports psychology certification is really what it is it's psychology just applied specifically to sport. It's people. Our athletes are just people. They just like to do athletics, and that's a place where they can learn about themselves, and then you all in the positions of coach have a tremendous influence on these young people. And just as we heard earlier with the Good Athlete Project, we need to maybe kind of revisit how we think of this platform as an opportunity for us to influence young people. I, as the undersized, slow scrapper, am probably more the norm, than a couple of these other folks we get to be in the presence of who go on to play at that Division I or even that highest professional level of sport. Most of the kids we're coaching aren't going to do that. And yet as I go over here where my kids are playing flag football at Friday Night Lights, and we talk about things like character development, which is good, and we're trying to figure out what are we doing with these young people. I can't help but see that with the 8-year-olds, it's all about this trophy that's taller than they are, and who won first place, and who scored the most touchdowns. And when we really look at where kids are at age 8 or 9, they could barely, there's a select few, but on the whole, they're just trying to understand the idea of competition. And I think you need to know your kids and the age group that you're working with and really kind of understand what is developmentally appropriate. Because an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old, up to our 17, 18-year-olds are in dramatically different places. I'm sure you have a general understanding just by being around the kids you work with. I've certainly learned more as a parent and a coach than I did in the books in grad school. But there are things that we studied about how the mind works that I think could be useful to you as coaches. So I kind of want to share a little bit of that today. So if we think about sports psychology, well, the first thing is psychology. What exactly is that? And psychology in general is just the study of human thought and emotion and behavior. We look at how people, they think and they feel and they behave. And then obviously we know what sport is. There's a variety of sports. Some people debate whether golf is, but I think it is. It's hard. It's hard to make that little ball go where you want it to. But that's, and I'll come back to my golf game later. That's a sad story. But we look at sport and all the variety of ways that we engage people around learning, preparing, training, working as an individual or with a team. And so we're going to apply these principles of human thought, feeling, and behavior specifically in the arena of sport. And what exactly does that look like? What is sports psychology? Well, it takes on so many different elements. We talk about the training piece of it in here. We talk about the coaching piece. We talk about the relationships on the team. We talk about your individual players and all the stuff they have going on in their lives off the field. And you can see it in their body language when they come to practice some days. That kid's not going to be ready to work today. And you might even delve deeper and you might know that kid's story. And maybe there's something going on at home. What I'm hoping to give you today is a model that might help you to delve a little deeper and really assess, what's going on with some of your athletes or even as a team. Maybe these are some foundational skills that you can share with your kids that will be valuable to them in becoming more self-aware. And that awareness is a big piece of it. The fourth one up here, you hear a lot about in sports psychology is optimal performance or peak performance. Ideally, in terms of the competition, that's what we would like to achieve, right? Like, how do I get the best out of my kids, my players? How do I get us to that top level? That's what we're out there doing. But it's not always about the trophy, because there can be obviously successful seasons when you just didn't have the horses. You weren't going to win the first place trophy. But again, most of the kids aren't going to go on to that elite level, so we got to keep coming back to the character development and what are we trying to give these young people that's going to help them to go out in the world and be successful. But we'll talk a little bit about optimal peak performance. Getting in the zone or the flow are kind of the buzzwords in the field right now that I'm sure you're familiar with. But let's go to this model, which I use a lot with kids and young adults. This is what we call the cognitive behavioral triad. Cognitive, just having to do with your thoughts or your cognitions, and then the behaviors or your actions, and then what it is that we feel. So it breaks down these three elements of people. We feel, and then we think, and then we behave. And they interact with one another. Can anybody give me an example of an interaction that you can think of that might happen on the athletic field? So quiet. Striking out. Okay. I don't know what that's like. I was thinking home run, but strike out. Yeah, occasionally people strike out. If you strike out, that's a behavior. That's something that you just did. You didn't make that bat hit the ball in your allotted, three good swings at it, 3 strikes at it. And so when you strike out, what are you feeling? Are you feeling sad? Are you angry? What are the different feelings that go on, and then what are the thoughts that accompany that? When I talk with most young people, they can't tell you. They can't differentiate between feelings and thoughts and behaviors. And I see it maybe even more pronounced with, say, adolescent males. They might be more likely to put a fist through the sheetrock than be able to tell you that they're pissed off. And maybe they might know angry, but they might not know that they're anxious, that they're scared of failing. They might not know that they're sad. Sometimes it might even be more advanced. It might be a depression. But this little model with the feelings and the thoughts and the actions, when I can sit down with kids and help them to see, and they can break it down. I think Will alluded to this earlier. Sometimes kids act like, well, the world happens to me. The coach was unfair, didn't give me my fair shot at it, or the refs sucked today, or the weather was bad, the other team cheated. You have all these kind of excuses that kids use. And if we can, instead of challenging them on the excuse, you're lying, or quit making excuses, sometimes if we can step away from it and say, tell me how that works here. So you're angry because you all lost the game, or why does that make you angry that you lost the game? Let's break that down. Let's kind of get down into what does that mean to you. If your definition is that the win is everything, then understandably you're going to be angry because you didn't do it. You might even feel bad about yourself. This little model can help kids to start to see what they tell themselves, and then hopefully empower them to be able to understand that they actually have influence on this. I mean, you can't control what the playing conditions are going to be like. The weather in Oklahoma, it's not this nice all the time. This morning was really pretty for you out-of-towners. We get crazy weather here. And if you golf or play any sport outdoors in Oklahoma, you get pretty good at managing the elements. You better, because if that gets in your head, you're not going to have a perfect day. And a lot of times today with kids in sports psychology, we'll do things like, okay, what's your pre-game routine? Or, when you get up there before you're about to perform your skill, do you go through your little checklist and make sure that everything's right? Did you have the right amount of carbs and protein loaded? Did you get your sleep? And all of that stuff, we know the big diet, sleep, and exercise are important for our performance. But a lot of times that doesn't go right. I was taking my kid to the batting cage the other day, and the one we like to go to was packed, and we couldn't get in, so we were going to go to the other one across town, and my 10-year-old, he didn't like the balls because they're made of a different material, and it hurts his hands, and blah, blah, blah. And we get in there, and the machine's off-kilter, crooked, so the way it's throwing at him, he's catching his bat in the net on his backswing. And I just see him. He's just complaining, and nothing's going to work, and we're getting nothing out of this today. And really, we didn't get much in the way of any good swings at the bat with those impediments. But we got a long way with saying, all right, let's just bring it down. How do you calm yourself down when things aren't working for you? How do we quiet the mind? And that's a little bit of what sports psychology is helping kids to feel like they have a greater handle on their head and on how their body feels. Because if you get ramped up, you can't perform. Sports psychology probably had its beginning in the late 1800s with these two, I think, Harvard guys, Yerkes and Dodson. I don't know if you're familiar with the Yerkes-Dodson law. They got it named after themselves. But basically, it is just a graph that shows your arousal level, your care factor, I call it, and your performance level. So if you think of a graph like this, so if you have no arousal, you have no care, then you don't get out of bed in the morning, so your performance is pretty much a zero. But the more you care, the more you perform. The more you care, the more you perform. The more you care, the more you perform, and it continues to go up to a point. And then the more you care, the worse you perform. The more you care, the worse you perform, to where you puke on yourself or you're paralyzed with fear and you can't move. And so there's this general curve, and what we're trying to help our athletes achieve is that optimal performance level. You'll hear that term a lot in sports psychology. How do we achieve that optimal performance? Well, it's training, it's getting in the gym, it's work, as Coach K talked about. It's making sure that you've got good form. It's making sure that you take care of your body and you make yourself prepared to play. It's looking at film. It's knowing your game plan. It's keeping yourself academically eligible. It's not getting in a fight with your girlfriend so that you're distressed. And then when those things do come up, when life comes up and gets in the way, it's about how do we kind of quiet it down? Because if I go out there and I'm getting up to hit my golf ball, and as I start to think about, do I have the right club? Am I going to hit it in the water? All those fear things enter my mind. My grip gets a little tighter. And then my muscles tense up. And then I can't perform that skill the same way I've practiced it, every day of the week. As you all work with these kids, they're not going to be able to do what they know how to do because they're too jacked up. They got too much cortisol pumping through the system, and they can't perform the way they want to. So these are some of the things that we can do is like relaxation, visualization, deep breathing. These sound like kind of simple things, but and they're common knowledge, but they're not really commonly practiced. I find it even with elite athletes that they do the rest of the training, but in terms of self-awareness and knowing how to manage their thoughts and their emotions, they typically don't. And that's costing them in the competition arena. So I think sports psychology is kind of that next level of how we can help the athlete to become the complete athlete. That they're working so hard in every other way, we want to give them the mental and emotional awareness and skills to manage it. And so let me get on with my last slide here. You might recognize this guy. He's probably like our poster child for like sports psychology or awareness. It's Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks doing his meditation. And it's pretty well documented that he meets with a mental coach on a regular basis to try and work on his game. I mean, that's not a replacement for the diet, the sleep, the exercise, the practice, I had to go get a golf lesson over here because if I don't swing the club, my old habits, my bad mechanics get in the way. I can still lower my score by a few strokes if I'll quiet my head before I go out there. But when you're doing all the work in the weight room and on the field and in the film room and you're taking care of your body and you're doing those things, then that next level is developing a heightened self-awareness and a heightened ability to manage your emotions and your thoughts that can help you to get into the zone or the flow, that space where you're not even thinking, you're just feeling it. Everything's moving slow out there, and you're beating everybody to the spot. And athletes will report that they can achieve this rarely. So a lot of sports psychology and optimal performance is about how do we get people there? What are the elements that can facilitate an athlete getting in the zone? We can't create it all the time, but what we can do is help kids by developing these skills. They can get closer to it, and if nothing else, our bad days aren't as bad. And I keep going back to the golf analogy. I know because I'm old and I play golf now instead of football. But if I can keep it at a bogey instead of a double bogey, if I don't have a string of bogeys together, that might be the difference in being able to make the cut or stay in the tournament. So self-awareness is important. Of course, things like diet, sleep, and exercise, taking care of yourself, seeing the mind-body connection, and helping young people to understand that. But I would encourage you to go back with your kids and maybe even present that model that I showed you, the triangle with the feelings, thoughts, and the behaviors, just as a foundational tool for them to understand the interaction, and maybe even have them walk through their experiences when they hit a home run, when they strike out, when they achieve a goal, when they have an injury. See first if you can get them to identify, am I glad? The 4 primary emotions: glad, mad, sad, and scared. See if you can even get them to articulate what the feeling is. You'll probably be surprised, especially with some of the boys, they can't tell you what the emotion is. Females in general, in my experience, they're more emotionally attuned. They could tell you more about it. But getting them to come up with what the emotion is, and then say, what's the thought connected to it? What's the thought? Is it, my dad's going to be disappointed? Is it, I let down my teammates? Is it, I'm not as good as everybody thinks I am? I mean, these thoughts have a pretty massive effect on how the kid looks at themselves and then how they're going to be able to perform. I think in the past, sometimes we've said, you got to be tough. So in the interest of toughness, we've said, don't even pay attention to those uncomfortable, vulnerable feelings. Push them out in some way. And what we find in sports psychology is if you can name it and you can own it, now you're in the driver's seat. Now you have the ability to rethink it, to come up with a new narrative, a new interpretation of what it means. And some of this, I know you don't have all the time to sit down with every individual athlete, but if you could even get the athletes to, again, start being more self-aware, and then that's going to give them the foundation. Now, if you determine that there's bigger stuff going on than you have the time to deal with, that's when you need to reach out and look at what your other resources are. But that's sports psychology in a nutshell, and I think we're going to do a roundtable later or have another break, so if y'all have any questions for me, then find me then. Thank you.